Welcome to DeepDose.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are wading into, well, let's just say one of the most historically charged, really sensitive, and frankly often avoided subjects in intellectual circles, the true origins of humanity.
Absolutely. It's a topic that has fueled debate and skepticism, created some really profound doubts for generations, hasn't it?
It really has, especially for people trying to square their faith with, the pretty compelling evidence coming out of modern science over the last century and a half.
It's a huge challenge, yeah. And it demands, I think, real intellectual honesty. Ever since the mid-1800s, when we started, pulling these ancient bones out of the ground, the traditional narrative of a simple, singular creation has been under immense pressure.
Right.
We're talking about a direct clash, really, between the theory of evolution, which is backed by just mountains of data now, and the divine creation narratives, which are, the bedrock of most major religions.
Exactly. And for you listening, if you've got a university education, if you're engaged with science, just dismissing evolution as, quote, assumptive guesswork, well, it just doesn't cut it anymore, does it?
No, it doesn't satisfy. It doesn't answer the questions raised by the geology, the genetics, the fossils. We have to grapple with the evidence head on, I think. No evasion. And then try to build a sound intellectual response based on what truly makes us human.
And that whole challenge, that intellectual earthquake, really kicked off in 1856, didn't it? In Germany, in the Neanderthal Valley.
That's the place. Before then, fossils were known, but they were clearly, extinct dinosaurs, ancient sea creatures, things far removed from us.
Okay.
But this discovery was different. It was a partial skull, looked human-like in ways, but it was flatter, had this really prominent brow ridge, and the overall size was just bigger, chunkier than any modern human skull.
And that find just changed everything.
It absolutely did. It threw this radical idea onto the table that maybe, just maybe, there were sophisticated two-legged creatures walking the earth before what we think of as humanity.
Which immediately slams into the core belief, certainly in the Abrahamic faith, that the first human, Adam, was created directly from clay, fully formed, spiritually aware, no animal-like precursor.
Precisely. So our mission today in this deep dive is really two things. First, we need to properly appreciate the sheer weight of the evidence, the fossils themselves, and how we date them. We can't shy away from that.
Right.
And second, once we've acknowledged that evidence, we need to provide the crucial, nuanced arguments drawing from both scripture and science that really distinguish the children of Adam, humankind, from these pre-modern hominid creatures.
Okay, let's start there then. Let's unpack this weight of evidence, the bones, the dating. Where do we begin?
Well, back in 1856 with that first Neanderthal skull, the main tool they had for dating was carbon dating, carbon-14 dating.
Okay, I've heard of that. It measures decay, right?
Exactly. It measures the decay of carbon-14, which is an isotope found in all living things. When something dies, it stops taking in carbon-14, and the existing amount decays at a known rate. So you measure what's left.
And the initial results suggested these bones were ancient.
Incredibly old, yes. Millions of years, according to those early tests. And understandably, that met with a lot of skepticism, particularly from religious scholars.
But the skepticism wasn't just based on faith, was it? There were real scientific problems with carbon dating back then, and even now for very old samples.
Oh, absolutely. Scientifically valid concerns. Carbon dating is actually only reliable for a relatively short time frame, geologically speaking, maybe up to about 50,000 years, give or take.
50,000, but they were talking millions for that skull.
Precisely the problem. Beyond that 50,000-year mark, the amount of carbon-14 left is just minuscule, almost impossible to measure accurately, especially with older tech. But the bigger issue, the real killer for reliability on potentially ancient samples, is contamination.
Contamination? How so?
Well, think about it. If that bone, or the soil it's buried in, gets exposed to any modern carbon, maybe from groundwater, plant roots, even handling in the lab, it throws the measurement way off. It makes the sample seem younger than it is, or sometimes, paradoxically, gives these wildly inaccurate ancient dates. If the contamination process is complex, it could lead to completely wrong results.
Okay, so the first method was shaky, especially for something potentially millions of years old. So how did science move forward? How did they get to evidence that, as you said, became genuinely hard to refute?
Right, they needed different clocks. They realized they couldn't just rely on the decay of organic material like carbon. They needed methods based on geology, on minerals, on the environment around the fossil, things that measure time on a much, much grander scale.
Okay, so what are these more advanced technologies, the ones that really solidified the ages?
Well, we move beyond just refining carbon dating, like radiocarbon dating, which is more precise but still has the time limit. The real breakthroughs came with techniques that measure the effects of natural background radiation accumulating over vast periods.
Radiation. How does that work as a clock?
Okay, think about methods like electron paramagnetic resonance, or EPR, and thermoluminescence dating. These don't look at the fossil's carbon. They look at minerals in the surrounding sediment, or maybe in the tooth enamel of the fossil itself, things like quartz crystals.
Right.
These crystals trap electrons over time due to natural radiation from the Earth. When scientists heat the sample or expose it to microwaves in the lab, these trapped electrons are released, and they give off light, or energy. The amount of energy released is proportional to how long the crystal has been buried and exposed to radiation.
Wow, okay, so the dirt itself becomes the clock. That's clever.
It is. And then you have the radiometric dating methods. These are perhaps the most famous for dating rocks. Things like potassium-argon dating or uranium-lead dating.
Those sound familiar from geology class?
Yeah, they measure the decay of radioactive isotopes found in volcanic rocks. This is super useful because lots of important hominid fossils are found sandwiched between layers of volcanic ash or lava from ancient eruptions.
Ah, I see. So if you can date the volcanic layer just above the fossil and another layer just below it.
You've got a minimum and maximum age for the fossil itself. You've bracketed it with incredibly high certainty, often spanning millions of years.
Okay, but I have to push back a bit here. If all of these methods are ultimately measuring some kind of decay, carbon decay, uranium decay, trapped electrons leaking away, couldn't there be some, unknown environmental factor that affects all these decay rates, making them all consistently wrong?
That's the key intellectual question, absolutely. And the answer, the reason scientists have such confidence, lies in the independence of the methods.
Yeah.
They rely on fundamentally different physical processes and materials.
Okay, explain that independence.
Look at the cutting-edge stuff now, like accelerated mass spectrometry, or AMS. This isn't just measuring decay passively. It literally accelerates ions from a tiny sample through a magnetic field to count specific isotopes directly. It's incredibly precise, needs minuscule samples. Then you've got the uranium-thorium method. This often samples mineral structures formed by water, like stalactites in caves where fossils might be found, or even pigments used in ancient cave paintings. It relies on the decay chain of uranium into thorium within those calcium carbonate structures.
Right, so AMS counts ions, EPR thermoluminescence measures trapped energy in crystals, radiometric measures volcanic decay, uranium-thorium looks at mineral formations. They're all different physics.
Exactly. Different materials, different processes, different potential sources of error. So the killer argument becomes statistical convergence, meaning, yeah, any one method could be wrong. Maybe contamination skewed the EPR reading. Maybe there was an issue at the volcanic layer for the radiometric date. Fine. But when you take a fossil site and you date it using EPR on the tooth enamel and thermoluminescence on the surrounding quartz sand and potassium-argon on the volcanic ash layer below it and maybe AMS on a tiny fragment of associated charcoal, and all these fundamentally different methods point to the same age, say 3.2 million years old.
Then the odds of them all being independently wrong, by coincidence, in the exact same way to produce the exact same incorrect age, become astronomically small. It's just incredibly improbable. At that point, based on the convergence of independent evidence, it's very, very hard not to accept the reported age as being accurate, or at least very close.
And this confidence isn't just based on one or two sites, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about a huge number of finds now. It's not just that 1856 skull anymore.
Oh, not at all. We absolutely have to acknowledge that, yes, some fossils have been faked over the years. Piltdown Man being the most famous example. Science is self-correcting on that.
Sure.
But we are now looking at a global total of over 6,000 documented hominid fossils. 6,000, ranging from tiny finger bones to nearly complete skeletons like Lucy.
Wow.
And the vast majority of these, their authenticity isn't seriously disputed, and their ages, determined by these converging modern methods, simply cannot be wished away. They are genuinely ancient. Some are hundreds of thousands, some are millions of years old. That's the reality the data presents. And this sheer mountain of evidence, these undeniably ancient human-like remains, this is what led directly to what you called the dangerous theory.
It's the theory of evolution, specifically applied to human origins, the idea that these weren't just unrelated creatures, but perhaps our ancestors or part of a lineage leading to us, Homo sapiens, that modern humans evolved from earlier, more ape-like forms.
And the clash with traditional faith was just inevitable.
Completely unavoidable, because it hits right at the core doctrine. the special, direct creation of Adam from clay, distinct and separate from the animal kingdom. No biological precursors.
So, facing this onslaught of evidence over the last 150 years, how did the world of faith respond? It must have been varied.
It certainly was, and it evolved over time. Within Christianity and Judaism, initial responses often involved outright refutation, declaring the fossils hoaxes, frauds, or sometimes a more philosophical argument emerged. Maybe God placed these fossils here specifically to test our faith, to see if we'd believe his word over the evidence of our eyes.
Okay, that's one approach. What about the Muslim response? The source material suggested it was more fragmented, perhaps less unified.
It was, and arguably caught more off guard by the sheer scientific weight that built up. The response generally fragmented into several camps. You had some scholars who simply remained silent, preferring not to engage with the topic at all.
Just avoided it.
Pretty much. Others tried to find ways to reconcile parts of evolutionary theory with scripture, maybe allowing for evolution of the physical body, but insisting on a separate spiritual creation for Adam. And then you had a third group who flatly rejected the entire theory as assumptive delusion, as pure guesswork.
But the problem with just calling it guesswork, especially now...
Exactly. It became increasingly insufficient. If you're a young person, you're learning about genetics, geology, fossil dating in university, seeing the data firsthand, then you go to a religious lecture where all of that is just waved away as a guess without a robust, evidence-based counterargument. Well, that creates an intellectual crisis, doesn't it?
It certainly can. It feels like one side is engaging with the facts and the other is just denying them.
And that's the danger. Simply avoiding the facts doesn't make them go away. It doesn't lessen their intellectual impact. The result, for many scholars, was the adoption of this policy called tawaquf.
Tawaquf. Okay, we need to understand this term properly. The source says it might have done more harm than good in the long run.
That's the argument presented, yes. Tawaquf basically means suspension or withholding judgment or discussion. It's a principle of not delving too deeply or taking a definitive stance on matters that aren't explicitly and clearly addressed in the Quran or the established traditions, the Sunnah.
So the intention was good, to avoid speculation about divine matters.
The intention was likely to prevent people from straying into theological error or unnecessary conjecture. But when faced with something like the fossil record, undeniable physical evidence that seemed to contradict a widely held traditional interpretation of creation, the policy of tawaquf, of silence, effectively created an intellectual vacuum.
And nature abhors a vacuum, so what filled it?
Well, when students or curious individuals brought the fossil evidence to scholars adhering strictly to tawaquf, they often receive no satisfactory answer or just a reiteration of the traditional narrative without addressing the challenging evidence. Or worse, simple denial.
Which could erode trust, I imagine.
That's the argument. This failure to engage robustly, to provide a strong intellectual framework that could accommodate both the scripture and the scientific facts, allowed the purely scientific evolutionary narrative to become the default explanation for many. It sowed widespread doubt.
And the statistics seem to bear this out. It's not just a theoretical problem.
No, the numbers are quite stark. Globally, around 19% of Muslims currently believe the theory of evolution is essentially factual. But look at the youth. That's where the real impact shows.
That McGill University survey.
Yeah, 2009 in Pakistani high schools. They asked students directly, does the existence of all these fossils make you think the theory of evolution could be true? 86%. 86% said yes.
86%. That's staggering. It shows the power of observable evidence over just being told to ignore it.
It absolutely does. And it's not just Pakistan. Pew Research in 2013 showed belief in evolution increasing, even in more conservative Muslim-majority countries like Iran and Afghanistan, around 26% acceptance then, likely higher now.
The tension is so palpable that it even leads to extreme actions, right? Like ISIS in Mosul.
A disturbing example, yes. When ISIS took control of Mosul in 2014, one of their early decrees was to ban the teaching of biology in schools. Why? Explicitly because of the clash between evolutionary theory and their rigid interpretation of creation. They saw the science itself as a direct threat to faith.
It shows how deep this perceived conflict runs. And this isn't even a new debate, is it? The source mentions Emperor Julian back in the 5th century.
Right, a fascinating historical echo recorded by St. Augustine. Roughly 170 years after Christ, there was apparently a formal debate held before the Roman Emperor Julian about human origins.
And what was the outcome?
You had the religious side arguing for the singular special creation of Adam, and the skeptical side, likely drawing on existing philosophical ideas about multiple worlds or races, arguing for maybe different origins. After hearing both, Emperor Julian apparently concluded, well, maybe there have been atoms more than one.
Atoms more than one. That's provocative thought from antiquity.
It is. And that very concept, the idea of multiple pre-atom human-like populations or species, is exactly what a significant number of Muslims today are apparently exploring as a way to make sense of the fossil evidence. They see Lucy, they see Neanderthals, and they think, okay, maybe these were pre-Adamic beings, and then Adam was created specially.
It's an attempt at reconciliation.
It is.
Yeah.
But to properly evaluate that idea and to build our own intellectual framework, we first need to get a clearer picture of who these ancient creatures actually were. What does the evidence tell us about them?
Okay, the intellectual battleground is mapped out. Let's now populate it with some of the key players, the actual fossils. And we have to start with probably the most famous hominid fossil ever found, Lucy.
Lucy. Yes, Australopithecus afarensis. Discovered in Ethiopia back in 1974. Her local Ethiopian name is Dinkinesh, which apparently means you are marvelous or you are pretty.
A nice touch. And what made her so significant?
Two main things. First, her completeness. About 40% of her skeleton was recovered, which is remarkable for something so old. And second, her anatomy clearly showed she was bipedal. She walked upright on two legs, much like us, even though her brain was small and she had other ape-like features.
And her age. Using those advanced dating methods we talked about.
Dated very reliably to around 3.2 million years ago.
3.2 million. Okay. That immediately puts her vastly outside any reasonable time frame for the biblical or Quranic Adam.
Absolutely. And further research, like that study from the University of Texas, painted a rather poignant picture of her end. Based on fracture patterns in her bones, they concluded she likely died from injuries sustained in a fall from a significant height, probably out of a tree.
Falling from a tree suggests she still spent a lot of time in them, despite being bipedal.
Seems likely. And adding to the picture, they found evidence she was scavenged after death. There was apparently an animal tooth mark still embedded in her hip bone.
Grim. But the main point, scientifically, is that creatures this ancient, like Lucy, they're anatomically quite distinct from modern humans, right? Closer to apes in many ways.
Definitely. While bipedalism is a key trait we associate with humans, Lucy's skull size, her facial structure, her likely cognitive abilities were all much more akin to modern chimpanzees or gorillas than to Homo sapiens. She demonstrates that bipedalism evolved much earlier than large brains or complex culture. She shows that creatures walked upright millions of years ago, but it doesn't automatically make them human in the way we understand the term.
So she's a very early branch on the hominid tree, but maybe not on the direct line leading to us.
That's how many paleoanthropologists see her, yes. An early experiment in upright walking.
And she's just one example. The fossil record includes many others from that deep past.
Oh, many. You have other Australopithecus finds, skeletons dated to around 2 million years ago, also from Ethiopia. And then there's the famous Turkana boy, a nearly complete skeleton of a young adolescent Homo erectus or Homo ergaster from Kenya, dated to about 1.5 or 1.6 million years ago. He was taller, more modern looking than Lucy, but still very distinct.
Okay, so those are ancient, clearly non-modern forms. But then the discoveries get weirder, stranger.
They certainly get harder to categorize neatly. Take the finds at Kafsa Cave in Israel. This wasn't just isolated bones, it was a collection of skeletons, maybe representing a family or small group, at least 9 individuals.
And what was strange about them?
Well, their anatomy was somewhat archaic, but what really stood out was a burial. One of the child skeletons was found intentionally positioned, clutching a large set of deer antlers in its hands.
Antlers, held in the hands. That suggests something more than just dying, right? Ritual, symbolism.
It's highly suggestive, isn't it? It hints at a level of abstract thought or perhaps burial practice that we usually associate with later humans. Yet their physical form wasn't quite modern Homo sapiens. They're dated to around 90,000, 100,000 years ago, a time when modern humans were also emerging. It's a complex picture.
A puzzle, and then you have the hobbits.
Right. Homo floresiensis, found in Liang Bua Cave on the island of Flores in Indonesia. Another group find about 9 individuals represented, and the defining feature, they were tiny.
How tiny?
Fully grown adults were maybe just over 3 feet tall, about a meter.
Seriously, 3 feet tall adults, not children.
No adults, with proportionally small brains as well. The prevailing theory is that they represent a case of island dwarfism, a phenomenon where species isolated on islands with limited resources tend to shrink dramatically over many generations.
Fascinating. But were they just tiny apes?
That's the incredible part. Despite their small size and small brains, the archaeological evidence shows they made and used quite sophisticated stone tools, hunted pygmy elephants, and possibly used fire.
So, tiny bodies, tiny brains, but tool use and hunting. That really messes with the simple idea that big brain equals complex behavior, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It shows that the relationship between brain size, intelligence, and behavior is much more complicated than we thought. The hobbits are another unique branch of the hominid family tree that apparently survived until relatively recently, maybe 50,000 years ago, before dying out.
Okay, so we have Lucy, Turkana, the Kafsa individuals, the hobbits. Any other really significant finds that blur the lines?
Well, there are classic finds like Peking Man from China, Homo erectus, the very robust Petrolona skull from Greece, which has features of both Homo erectus and Neanderthals. And then there's Tung's child from South Africa.
Tung's child, what's special about that one?
It was one of the very first Australopithecus finds back in the 1920s. It's the fossilized skull of a young child, maybe 3 years old. What makes it so challenging is its mix of features. Some are clearly ape-like, but the position of the foramen magnum, the hole where the spine connects, showed it walked upright. And endocaths of the brain suggested some reorganization towards a more human-like pattern.
So neither quite ape nor quite human as we know it.
Exactly. Many experts consider Tung's child and its species, Australopithecus africanus, to represent a completely distinct lineage. Not necessarily our direct ancestor, maybe not even directly ancestral to Lucy's species, but another experiment in hominid evolution that eventually hit a dead end. It underscores the sheer diversity of bipedal creatures that have existed.
Okay, so the picture is complex. A world populated for millions of years by various two-legged, tool-using, sometimes fire-wielding creatures, none of whom were us. But now we have to confront the big one. The creature that lived much closer to our time, looked more like us, behaved in ways that seem familiar. The Neanderthal.
Yes. Homo neanderthalensis. They are the crux of the challenge, I think. That 1856 skull belonged to them. They thrived across Europe and Western Asia from maybe 450,000 years ago, right up until about 40,000 years ago.
And they overlap with modern humans arriving in Europe.
They do, for maybe 5,000 to 10,000 years in some regions. And they are, the classic caveman archetype in popular culture, often depicted as brutish, grunting, club-wielding.
But why are they such a harder challenge to distinguish from humans compared to, say, Lucy, who lived over 3 million years ago?
Several reasons. First, the time frame. 40,000 years ago is practically yesterday in geological terms compared to 3.2 million. It feels uncomfortably close to our own origins. Second, their anatomy, while distinct, the brow ridge, the stocky build, the larger skull capacity in some cases, is still recognizably human-like in many ways.
Okay.
But most importantly, it's their behavior. The archaeological evidence points to a level of sophistication that really blurred the lines for a long time.
Let's list those seemingly human-like traits again.
Okay. They were found primarily across Eurasia, France, Spain, Germany, the Near East. Physically very powerful. Males averaged around 5'5", females around 5 foot. Stocky, heavily muscled builds, likely adaptations to the cold Ice Age climates they lived in.
Powerful hunters.
Extremely effective ambush hunters, yes. Evidence shows they cooperatively hunted large, dangerous game and strains. Woolly mammoths, woolly rhinos, wild boar, deer. Their skeletal structure, especially those robust knee joints, suggests they had incredible stamina and strength. Some biomechanical analyses suggest they could potentially run maybe 35, 40 miles quite easily, perhaps for pursuit or tracking.
Wow. And crucially, fire, medicine, social groups?
Yes. They definitely controlled and used fire routinely. We find hearths and manganese dioxide residues from fire starting in their caves. They lived in caves and rock shelters, often in what looked like family groups. They manufactured sophisticated stone tools using the Mousterian technique, which requires skill and planning. And there's evidence they used basic medicinal plants. Residues found in dental plaque, for instance, suggest knowledge of things like poplar, containing salicylic acid like aspirin, and possibly even penicillium mold.
Okay, you list all that: fire, tools, hunting big game, medicine, living in groups, burying their dead sometimes. It sounds very, very human.
It does. And that's the trap. When people hear these details, it's incredibly easy to just conclude, well, okay, these must have been the direct ancestors of modern humans. Evolution looks true.
This is the critical point, then. If we can't draw a clear intellectual line between Adam's descendants and Neanderthals based on fundamental differences rather than just superficial similarities,
then the argument for a distinct human creation becomes much harder to sustain against the evolutionary narrative. This is where we absolutely must introduce the sound arguments for distinction. We need to dissect these shared traits and ask, are they truly markers of humanity? Or are they sophisticated animal survival strategies that don't necessarily equate to being human in the spiritual and intellectual sense?
Okay, let's do that. Let's systematically take apart these similarities. The core idea here, intellectually, has to be that just because a creature uses fire or hunts in a pack or chews on a medicinal leaf, that doesn't automatically make it human in the profound sense. Those things might just be advanced animal behaviors.
Precisely. These are not, in themselves, definitive proof of human status. Let's start with the big one, the use of fire.
Okay. We know Neanderthals had it. The manganese dioxide on cave ceilings, the hearths. Pretty clear evidence they could make and control fire. It feels very human.
It does feel human because we rely on it so heavily. And fire has been used by hominids, including Neanderthals and earlier Homo erectus, for maybe 800,000 years, possibly longer. It's a very ancient technology.
But the crucial question for this argument is creating and controlling fire an exclusively human ability? Is it something only the children of Adam can do?
And the answer, stunningly, is no. Absolutely not. We need to look at the natural world, at animal behavior. And the example provided in the source material is fantastic. The black kite, an eagle found in Australia.
An eagle that uses fire, seriously.
Seriously. For a long time, scientists observed these kites hanging around the edges of natural bushfires, swooping down to catch insects and small animals fleeing the flames. They assumed the birds were just opportunistically taking advantage of the fire.
Makes sense. Easy meal.
But then, more careful observation, including accounts from Aboriginal rangers who've known this for generations, revealed something incredible. The black kites aren't just using the fire. Sometimes they're actively spreading it, intentionally.
How? How does a bird spread fire?
They've been seen picking up small, smoldering twigs or pieces of burning grass from an existing fire, either a natural one or maybe one set by humans carrying it in their talons or beaks, flying some distance away to an area of unburnt dry grass, and then dropping the burning stick to start a new fire.
No way. Why would they do that?
To flush out more prey. They use fire as a hunting tool to deliberately expand the fire front and force lizards, rodents, insects out into the open where they can be easily caught.
That's astonishing. That's tactical. That's tool use. That's environmental manipulation using fire by a bird.
Exactly. It's sophisticated, intentional fire control for a specific survival advantage. So if a bird, driven by instinct and learned behavior for hunting, can manage fire to this degree,
then the fact that Neanderthals could light a fire in their cave suddenly seems less like a uniquely human spark of genius and more like a very advanced animal adaptation for warmth, protection, and maybe cooking.
it confirms they were highly intelligent creatures, absolutely, masters of their environment. But it doesn't by itself elevate them to human status in the theological or philosophical sense. It's powerful evidence for animal intelligence, not necessarily proto-humanity.
Okay, point taken on fire. What about the use of medicine? Neanderthals using leaves and herbs, that feels like the dawn of pharmacology, doesn't it? A uniquely human concern for health.
Again, it feels that way to us because we've developed it to such an extent. But the underlying behavior self-medication using natural substances is surprisingly widespread in the animal kingdom. There's a whole field dedicated to studying it. Zoopharmacognosy.
Animal pharmacy, basically.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
And it shows animals aren't just randomly munching plants. They often specifically seek out certain substances to treat ailments or improve their condition.
Okay, give us some solid examples.
Well, the source mentions macaw parrots in Brazil.
Yeah.
These parrots eat seeds that contain toxins, but they've learned to systematically fly to specific clay licks and consume the clay.
Clay. Why clay?
The clay binds to the toxins in their gut, neutralizing them. It also seems to kill intestinal worms and bacteria. It's targeted detoxification and parasite control. They know exactly which clay to eat and when.
Incredible. So they're actively treating themselves?
Definitely. And look at examples related to reproduction, which often requires specific physiological adjustments. Pregnant lemurs in Madagascar have been observed changing their diet to eat fig leaves, which they don't normally focus on. Why? It seems to significantly increase their milk production just before they give birth.
They know what helps lactation.
It appears so. Similarly, pregnant elephants in Kenya sometimes seek out and consume the leaves of a particular tree, again something outside their usual diet. It's believed these leaves might help induce labor or perhaps ease the delivery process. They instinctively know what their bodies need.
And this isn't just about treating sickness, it can be about enhancing biological functions too.
Yes, consider the Brazilian spider monkeys mentioned. Researchers observed that these monkeys adopt a very specific fruit-based diet only during their mating season.
a kind of fertility diet.
It seems to function that way. A complex dietary shift directly links to optimizing reproductive success. This kind of sophisticated nutritional strategy tied to a specific life cycle event was, for a long time, thought to be a hallmark of human planning and cultural knowledge. But animals do it too.
So if parrots use clay for detox, lemurs eat leaves for milk, elephants use plants for pregnancy, and monkeys adjust their diet for mating.
Then the fact that Neanderthals chewed on willow bark for pain or used other basic herbs for ailments just puts them in the same category of sophisticated animals employing zoopharmacognosy. It shows advanced natural knowledge and instinct honed by survival.
But not necessarily at the beginning of human medicine or abstract thought about healing.
It doesn't cross that threshold. It aligns them more with the intelligent survival strategies we see in many other species, rather than marking them as uniquely proto-human.
Okay, that's fire in medicine addressed. The third big similarity was pack hunting. Neanderthals hunted cooperatively, ambushing large prey. That suggests strategy, communication, social bonds, very human-like cooperation.
This one is probably the easiest to counter, actually, although the cooperation aspect is important. Let's break it down. First, ambush hunting is a strategy.
Is that common?
Extremely. The source notes 307 different kinds of animals are known to use ambush tactics. Think of a Bengal tiger waiting patiently in the reeds, a crocodile lurking just below the surface, a bear hiding near a salmon run. It's a highly effective way to hunt if you're not built for sustained speed chases.
Okay, so ambush itself isn't special. What about the cooperative part? Hunting together as a pack?
Also incredibly common. Over 400 animal species are classified as pack hunters. And this isn't limited to just mammals on land.
Give examples.
You've got the stunningly coordinated hunts of orcas, killer whales, in the ocean, working together to isolate seals on ice floes or herd fish. You have birds like Harris's hawks in the Americas that hunt cooperatively with complex strategies involving fletchers and ambushers. And on land, of course, the classic example is the gray wolf pack.
Wolf packs demonstrate amazing coordination.
They really do. They use sophisticated communication, have clear social hierarchies that dictate roles in the hunt, employ flanking maneuvers, relay running to tire prey. It's complex, learned, coordinated behavior far beyond simple instinct.
So Neanderthals hunting woolly mammoths together, while impressive,
Is functionally similar to a wolf pack bringing down a bison or orcas hunting a whale. It's evidence of high intelligence, social structure, and effective survival strategy within a challenging environment. But again, it's a behavior shared with hundreds of other highly successful animal species. It doesn't in itself make them uniquely human precursors.
Okay, so when we strip away these three big superficial similarities, fire, medicine, pack hunting, we see they're actually hallmarks of highly intelligent, adaptable animals surviving in their world, not necessarily stepping stones to humanity.
Exactly. These traits show Neanderthals were perhaps at the pinnacle of sophisticated animal existence. Masters of survival using the tools available to them: fire, plants, cooperation. They perfected the Javiav life form, as we'll discuss, maximizing survival needs.
But they still lack those fundamental, unique characteristics that truly define the children of Adam.
That's the argument. We've cleared away the superficial clutter. Now let's build the case for the real distinctions, the characteristics that do separate humanity.
All right, this feels like the core of the argument. Moving beyond behaviors that animals also show and into things that are claimed to be fundamentally uniquely human, or at least fundamentally different in Neanderthals. Where do we start?
Let's start with something deeply physiological, something tied to our very interaction with the planet, the circadian cycle, and how it relates to habitat choice.
Okay, circadian rhythm, our internal body clock. How does that differentiate us from Neanderthals?
Remember, Neanderthals thrived during the ice ages, primarily in the colder regions of Eurasia, Germany, France, Spain, etc. We also established they were physically capable of moving large distances, potentially running 35, 40 miles easily.
Right. So the question is, why didn't they just move? Why endure the harsh ice age conditions in northern caves if they could have migrated south to warmer climates like Africa or the Mediterranean coast?
It's a major puzzle if you assume they function just like us. Why choose the cold and dark? The answer seems to lie in their fundamental biology, revealed by genetics.
Genetics. What did they find in Neanderthal DNA?
Genetic material recovered from Neanderthal bones, which is amazing in itself, showed the presence and structure of specific proteins, notably ASB1 and XOC6. These proteins are strongly linked to regulating sleep cycles and sensitivity to light.
And what did the Neanderthal versions of these proteins indicate?
They indicated a genetic predisposition towards being nocturnal. Their biology suggested they were more comfortable, more active during the night, and likely slept during the daylight hours. They preferred the darkness.
Wow. So their preference for caves wasn't just about shelter. It might have been tied to a fundamental preference for dim light and night activity. It was built into their genes.
That seems to be the strong implication of the genetic evidence. They were creatures of the dusk and night.
Okay, now contrast that with humans, Homo sapiens.
The human body is fundamentally biochemically wired to the sun. Our circadian cycle is this incredibly complex internal clock that regulates almost everything: sleep, hormone release, body temperature, alertness. And it's naturally synchronized with solar time, with the 24-hour cycle of light and dark caused by the Earth's rotation.
We're diurnal creatures, built for the day.
Overwhelmingly so. Our bodies are programmed to produce melatonin, the sleep hormone, when darkness falls, making sleep at night feel natural and restorative. Conversely, when the sun rises, cortisol levels increase, waking us up, making us alert. Trying to live nocturnally goes against our deep-seated biological programming.
It feels fundamentally unnatural for most people to be awake all night and sleep all day.
It does. And this deep connection to the rhythm of day and night is even referenced divinely. The source points to Surarum, verse 23. And among his signs is your sleep by night and by day, and your seeking of his bounty. It acknowledges this natural cycle of rest and activity tied to light as a fundamental sign of divine order in creation.
So the distinction here is profound. Neanderthals were genetically inclined towards nocturnal life and darkness, while humans are biochemically synchronized with daylight and the solar cycle. Two fundamentally different modes of being.
A very clear physiological difference, yes.
Okay, what's the second major distinction?
This one addresses the very quality of their existence. Perpetual struggle versus a divinely granted safe habitat and provision. What was life actually like for a Neanderthal?
The source painted a pretty brutal picture: high mortality rates.
Extremely high. The evidence suggests that a staggering 80% of Neanderthals died before reaching the age of 40. 80%.
That's incredibly young. What was killing them? Not just old age or disease.
Primarily, it seems, violence. Specifically, animal attacks. Their world was a constant, relentless battle for survival against the formidable megafauna of the Ice Age.
Is there direct evidence for this? How do we know animals killed them?
Forensic analysis of their skeletons. That 2016 study mentioned looked at 124 Neanderthal individuals, specifically examining bone trauma fractures, puncture marks, signs of violent death.
And the results?
Stark. Of those 124 skeletons, 92 showed clear evidence of having been killed in attacks by ferocious animals. 92.
Almost 3/4 of the sample died violently from animal attack.
Yes. The main culprit identified was the cave bear. Huge, powerful bears that competed directly with Neanderthals for cave shelters and often attacked them. Imagine constantly fighting giant bears just for a place to sleep.
Terrifying. What else preyed on them?
The next biggest threat identified was the Smilodon, the saber-toothed cat. Huge fangs, powerful ambush predator, and after that, coordinated attacks by packs of Ice Age wolves.
So their daily life wasn't just hunting, it was also constantly avoiding being hunted, a never-ending struggle for basic safety.
Precisely. They could never truly secure a safe habitat. They were locked in this desperate competition with terrifying predators until eventually those giant animals and the Neanderthals themselves went extinct. It was only after their disappearance and the extinction of much of that megafauna that the Earth became a relatively safer place for modern humans to expand into.
And this contrasts sharply with the religious concept of provision for humans.
Very sharply. The source quotes Surah Araf. We alone gave you a safe habitat in the earth, and it was us who placed your livelihood in it. The foundational narrative for humanity, for Adam's children, involves the idea of Earth being prepared for them, providing sustenance and a measure of security not afforded to creatures locked in that kind of brutal existential struggle.
So Neanderthal life was characterized by constant danger and insecurity, while the human condition, relatively speaking, is founded on provision and safety, another fundamental difference in the nature of existence.
A crucial difference in the relationship between the creature and its environment, yes.
Okay, the third distinction. This one sounds visceral. Diet. Specifically, cannibalism versus a lawful provision. Neanderthals ate each other.
The evidence is quite strong and disturbing. Yes, Neanderthals practiced cannibalism. And this wasn't necessarily just ritualistic. The evidence points towards it being for nutritional purposes, especially during times of scarcity.
Like other animals do.
Exactly. It's a behavior seen in many predator species and even primates under stress. Chimpanzees, lions, hippos sometimes kill and eat rivals or young. The source even mentions hyenas, where the larger females are needed partly to protect cubs from being eaten by the males. It points to a kind of brutal, instinct-driven survival logic.
What's the specific fossil evidence for Neanderthal cannibalism? It must be pretty grim.
It is. Across Europe sites, in Croatia, Spain, Belgium, archaeologists consistently find Neanderthal bones, particularly limb bones like the femur, that have been deliberately broken open in a specific way.
Why break them like that?
To get at the bone marrow inside. Marrow is incredibly rich in fat and protein, a vital food source when other food is scarce. It's a clear sign of butchery for consumption.
Okay.
Any other signs?
Yes. In France, a Neanderthal skeleton was found with distinct cut marks on the ribs, matching the pattern made by stone tools used for stripping meat from bone. And even more chillingly, tooth marks from another Neanderthal were found on those ribs.
They were literally gnawing on each other's bones. The evidence points that way. And perhaps the most disturbing evidence comes from Spain, where a group of 12 Neanderthal skeletons was found, 3 adults, 3 teenagers, 3 younger children, and 3 infants. All showed signs of butchery, and critically, all of their skulls had been systematically broken open at the base.
To get to the brain.
That's the widely accepted interpretation. For years, some argued it might be ritualistic, maybe some complex burial practice, but technological advances, particularly around 2010, allowed for much finer analysis of the cut marks and fractures.
And what did that newer analysis show?
It strongly supported the conclusion that this was primarily for food. The way the skulls were opened was consistent with accessing the brain for consumption, not a careful ritual preparation. Vindija Cave in Croatia yielded similar finds, numerous Neanderthal skulls, all systematically cracked open. It paints a picture of a species sometimes pushed to the absolute brink of survival, consuming their own kind to stay alive.
A truly desperate existence. Now contrast that dietary reality with what happens just a few thousand years after the Neanderthals disappear around 40,000 years ago. What do we see with early modern humans?
The shift is incredibly rapid and profound. Almost immediately, geologically speaking, you see the beginnings of something completely different. Agriculture, deliberate cultivation of plants for food.
How early does agriculture appear?
Some of the earliest strong evidence comes from around 28,000 years ago, just 12,000 years after the last Neanderthals. On the Solomon Islands, clear archaeological evidence shows humans were cultivating taro root. That's organized farming.
And the tools change too.
Drastically. Near the Sea of Galilee, tools dating back almost that far have been found with specific microscopic wear patterns and residues. Silicophytoliths, indicating they were used consistently for cutting soft, green, silica-rich plants like cereals or reeds. Not just butchering animals or scraping hides, but harvesting crops.
This is the emergence of good and lawful provisions mentioned in the scriptures.
It aligns perfectly with that concept, doesn't it? Surah Isra states that the children of Adam were granted them good and lawful provisions and privileged them above many of our creatures. The contrast couldn't be starker. Neanderthals resorting to cannibalism, breaking open skulls for brains, versus early humans cultivating taro, developing tools to harvest grains like wheat, which Ibn Abbas reported was the first staple food Adam ate.
So the diet itself becomes a defining characteristic. Cannibalism driven by scarcity versus agriculture driven by planning and provision.
A fundamental divergence. It strongly suggests Neanderthals fall into that category of creatures over whom Adam's descendants were privileged, specifically through the gift of understanding and utilizing agriculture and lawful sustenance.
This ties into the final conceptual distinction you mentioned earlier, the Jabiyat concept.
Yes, Jabiyat. It's a term used in the Quran in Surah Shura, referring to Jabiyat al-Awwalin, often translated simply as generations of old, or those before you.
But the root word has a deeper meaning.
The root JBL relates to something's innate nature, its fundamental disposition, its basic physical requirements or constitution. Jabalah, therefore, can imply creatures driven purely by their most basic instinctual needs, the fundamental requirements of life.
Like eating, sleeping, self-preservation, procreation.
Exactly. The argument presented in the source is that the Neanderthal life form, as evidenced by their perpetual struggle, their cannibalism, their apparent lack of complex language or abstract culture beyond survival tools, perfectly fits this description of a Jabalah creature. A highly sophisticated biological entity, yes, but one whose entire existence revolved around fulfilling these base intrinsic needs.
So they represent the pinnacle of that instinct-driven life.
Perhaps. Intelligent, adaptable, powerful, but ultimately bound by the Jabalah, the basic requirements for survival. They perfected that mode of existence.
Which sets the stage for Adam as something fundamentally different, not just driven by need, but
By potential, by moral awareness, by the capacity for abstract thought, by language, by a relationship with the divine that goes beyond mere survival. Adam represents a shift from the purely Jabiat to a being capable of choice, responsibility, and spiritual aspiration. They operate on different planes.
Okay, we've covered physiological differences like the circadian cycle, existential differences like safe habitat versus struggle, and dietary differences like cannibalism versus agriculture. But the source material and many theological arguments point to one distinction as the ultimate defining one: the gift of language.
Yes. This is often seen as the absolute pinnacle of the argument, the defining characteristic bestowed upon Adam at the very moment of his creation, setting him apart from all other earthly beings.
And this is explicitly mentioned in Scripture.
Very explicitly. The source highlights Surah Baqarah, where it states that Allah taught Adam the names of all things, and then presented Adam with this knowledge to the angels, who were unable to name the things themselves. This act of teaching names is universally interpreted as the divine endowment of language, not just sounds, but the capacity for conceptualization, categorization, and symbolic communication.
The ability to label the world and share those labels.
Precisely. The power of abstraction and shared meaning that underpins all human culture, science, and thought.
Now let's connect this theological concept to modern science. Is there a biological basis for this unique human ability? We talked about the grammar gene.
We did. That's the FOXP2 gene, technically forkhead box protein P2. It's not solely a language gene. It's involved in other developmental processes too, but it plays an absolutely crucial role in the development of the brain circuits necessary for complex speech and language processing.
How is it discovered?
Rather serendipitously, back in 1998, scientists were studying a large family in England known as the KE family, many of whom suffered from a severe inherited speech and language disorder. They had trouble with grammar, articulation, understanding complex sentences. Researchers were able to pinpoint the cause to a mutation of this single gene, FOXP2.
So a problem with this one gene severely impacts language, and it affects more than just speech.
Yes, the human variant of FOXP2 is also important for the proper development of the lungs and even aspects of overall body growth. The source notes that without our specific, functional variant of FOXP2, humans likely wouldn't just struggle with language, they might even be physically shorter due to its role in broader developmental pathways.
Okay, now the crucial comparison. Did Neanderthals have the FOXP2 gene?
This is where it gets incredibly interesting and requires precision. Yes, genetic analysis of Neanderthal DNA shows they did possess the FOXP2 gene.
Ah, so they had the grammar gene. Doesn't that mean they could speak?
Not so fast. This is the vital nuance. They had a version of the FOXP2 gene, but it was subtly different from the variant found in modern humans. They lacked the specific mutations, the derived alleles, that appeared in the human lineage after we diverged from the Neanderthal lineage.
So they had the basic model, but not the language upgrade.
That's a good way to put it. The presence of the basic FOXP2 gene likely enabled some level of vocal communication, perhaps complex calls or signals like many social animals have. But the specific human variant seems essential for the fine motor control of the larynx and mouth. And perhaps more importantly, the cognitive ability to handle complex syntax, recursion, and the rapid sequencing needed for fluent speech.
So what could they likely do vocally based on this genetic difference in their anatomy? Could they talk at all?
The scientific consensus, based on both the genetics and anatomical reconstructions, leans heavily towards no. Not in the way we understand language. They could almost certainly make sounds, communicate warnings, social calls, express emotion vocally. But forming complex and tactically structured sentences, highly unlikely.
The source describes their likely vocalizations as grunting.
That's perhaps an oversimplification, but it captures the limitation. Think more along the lines of sophisticated animal calls rather than human conversation. Dr. Philip Lieberman, a prominent researcher in this area, famously attempted to reconstruct the Neanderthal vocal tract based on the shape of their fossilized skulls and hyoid bones, a small bone in the neck related to speech.
And what did his reconstruction suggest?
His conclusion was that their vocal apparatus was significantly different from ours. The position of the larynx was higher, more like an ape's or a human infant's. This anatomical structure would have severely limited the range of vowel sounds they could produce reliably. His modeling suggested they could perhaps make basic sounds, but not the full range needed for modern human speech.
Like a baby's sounds.
Somewhat analogous, yes. Limited vowel range, difficulty with certain consonants. Critically, the reconstruction suggested they might have had real trouble producing sounds that require precise manipulation of the nasal cavity, like the clear E, U, Ah vowels, or consonants like K, G, or even nasal consonants like N and M, which are fundamental to almost all human languages.
So the physical equipment wasn't optimized for speech, and the genetic software lacked the final crucial update for complex language processing.
That combination seems to be the key. The human ability to speak involves an incredibly complex interplay. The source mentions 18 different muscular and neurological mechanisms working in perfect coordination just to produce a single sentence. This intricate biological machinery, coupled with the specific human variant of FOXP2, appears to be unique to Homo sapiens.
So the gift of Adam, being taught the names, wasn't just metaphorical. It reflects a unique biological and cognitive capacity for language that fundamentally separates humanity from even our closest extinct relatives like Neanderthals.
That is the powerful argument being made, yes. Language becomes the ultimate, unbridgeable differentiator, the core of human identity and potential, bestowed divinely upon Adam's lineage, setting them apart from the sophisticated but ultimately speechless Jabbala creatures that came before or existed alongside them for a time. #TagAtro.
So we've really covered a lot of ground here, navigating some pretty challenging intellectual and theological territory. We started by acknowledging the undeniable reality of the fossil record, those 6,000 plus hominid fossils, their ancient ages confirmed by multiple reliable dating methods like AMS and EPR. We didn't shy away from that evidence.
Yeah, we accepted it. But instead of letting it automatically confirm a simple evolutionary narrative leading directly to us, we used it as a contrast. We built an intellectual framework based on fundamental, divinely referenced distinctions.
Right. We separated out those superficial similarities, fire use, basic medicine, pack hunting, showing how those are actually common, sophisticated animal behaviors, not uniquely human ones.
Exactly. And then we focus on the core differences. The human body's unique synchronization with the solar day via the circadian cycle, contrasting with the Neanderthal's apparent nocturnal preference. The concept of a divinely prepared, safe habitat and lawful provision for humanity versus the Neanderthal's brutal, high-mortality existence marked by constant struggle and even cannibalism.
And ultimately, the profound, unique gift of complex language rooted in both our specific biology, like the FOXP2 variant, and theologically, in Adam being taught the names of capacity. Neanderthals, despite their intelligence, apparently lacked.
Putting it all together, the evidence suggests these other creatures, Lucy, the Turkana the hobbits, even the Neanderthals, were indeed remarkable, intelligent, often bipedal beings. They represent the Jabbia, perhaps the pinnacle of instinct-driven, need-based existence. But they lack those core attributes, the specific physiological cycle, the provision existence, the moral dimension implied by lawful food, and crucially, language that defined the children of Adam.
They were complex creatures, but not human in that fundamental sense.
That's the intellectual conclusion derived from integrating both the scientific evidence and the scriptural framework.
We started this whole deep dive by mentioning that provocative comment from the Roman Emperor Julian back in the 5th century, his musing about the possibility of atoms more than one after hearing arguments about human origins.
Yes, that historical echo.
So here's the final thought for you, the listener, to take away and wrestle with. We've just spent time exploring this incredible diversity of ancient bipedal hominids. Lucy walking the earth over 3 million years ago, the enigmatic tongue's child, the tool-using but tiny hobbits, the sophisticated yet ultimately distinct Neanderthals. Does confronting the sheer, undeniable reality of this vast parade of non-human bipedal creatures over millions of years, does it change how you conceive of that specific, singular moment of Adam's creation? The creation of the first being endowed with that unique combination of moral agency, capacity for provision, and the power of language. Does the existence of the Jabbia enrich or complicate your understanding of what it means to be human?
A question worth pondering.
Indeed. Something to continue exploring as you process this deep dive. Until next time on The Deep Dive.